Birth name is Joseph Caesar Francis Mantegani. I was born on June the 3rd, 1937. I was born in my grandfather's and grandmother's home just across 412 of Mantegani Road. My parents was Gildo Mantegani and Eileen Mantegani.
And tell me about your parents. First your dad and then your mom.
Well, my dad was a farmer. He was a winemaker. He was a growed vineyards. He was a hard-working man. He would work from daylight till dark, and to make a living for his family. And he was strong-hearted, hard-headed sometimes, but he was a good, honest man. He was a fair man, but he didn't like anybody taking advantage of him. And that's all I could ask for a dad. But he was a good parent.
Okay, and your mom. Tell me about your mom.
My mother was one of the best cooks outside of my dad that I know of. She was a hard-working lady. She washed our clothes. She raised me and my brothers and sisters. She raised us, shall we say, almost by herself, because my dad was always in the fields working. But she would bake bread every Tuesday, I think. She would bake bread. She done our laundry, hung them out on the line out there to dry. She always cooked for the people that was working in the winery. When Daddy had the winery and had people up there working for him, she would do all the cooking for him. And she was just, I wish she was still around.
Tell me about your brothers and sisters.
Well, I've got 2 brothers and 2 sisters. Barbara Jean Mantegani, Iowa. She lives down on the old luncheonette. Her husband, Dick Greenlee, he died, and she's still there. She's getting kind of feeble now. She's a little more feeble than I am for her age. And then there was Julie Ray, my older brother. Well, he's younger. He was after Barbara. He was an airline pilot. He lives in Fayetteville, Arkansas now, and he's semi-retired because he works part-time at a station, at some business that he's got down there. But him and I always chummed around together until I went into service, and then there was Zita. She lives right below the house here. She was my younger sister. I don't recall too much of her because I was gone during her in service when she was growing up. And then there was Irvin. He's a younger brother. He lives here in this house now. He's got this old home place. And I didn't chum with him much either because I was gone, because he was the baby of the family. And he left, and whenever he went to college and left and went to work for the government, then he retired, moved back here, and now then we're kind of all getting together again.
Tell me about your grandparents, what you remember about them.
My grandparents, my mama's dad and mom, there's Joe Cigano and Eugenia Cigano. My grandfather couldn't read or write, but he was the best carpenter in the country. He was a blacksmith by trade, and I can remember as a kid that people would go over there at his blacksmith shop, and he would shrink wagon wheels, shrink the metal band around the wagon wheels for people to put on their wagons. But whenever they'd fall off, they would take them to him, and he could shrink them. He was a blacksmith, and he was a farmer. He couldn't read or write, but he could use a ruler and a square better than any man I ever saw in my life. And he didn't know what the numbers was, but he knew what a mark was. He'd say that mark and that mark. It might be a 6 and a 7, but he called them a marks. He didn't know what the numbers were. But he knew the difference because they looked different. And he always signed his name with an X. My grandmother, she was kind of she was strict. My grandma Sagano, she was real strict. And she was a homemaker, raised 6 girls. And they lived in a farm, which their Aunt Elma lives over there now. And I can remember them, you know, a little bit whenever I was growing up. But we were far apart. Well, far apart back then we was, because the only thing you had to ride around in was a horse and buggy. And I remember going over there, and my mom was hitching up the horse, which she would take us over to Grandma's, leave us over there, hitch up the buggy, she would take us over to Grandma Sagagnro's, and we'd spend a day over there sometimes. Then they would go over and help. Mama would go over and she would help grandma. They were, especially during the grape time, they were picking grapes and stuff, and she would help her cook to feed the people that was picking the grapes. And then we'd come back over here, ride the buggy back over here. And Grandma Sagagnro was just an old-time housewife, raised 6 girls, like I said. My grandfather, he was a hard worker. He was a great man, worked in the fields, worked in the blacksmith shop. They raised, I think at that time, they only had like 400 laying hens. And they raised the laying hens, and they raised them for hatching eggs. I can't remember who they sold them to that had a hatchery over in Harmon. Somebody had a hatchery over there, and she sold the eggs to them. But that's about all I can remember about them.
Tell me about your dad's parents.
And my dad's parents was Caesar Mantegani, and my grandmother was Rosa Mantegani. My grandfather, Caesar, I can remember, he started the winery. Name was Chesley, really. I don't remember too much about him because he died in I don't remember, it was 46, 45, 46, somewhere along in there. But I can remember him during the war, sitting in the other room in there at the old radio. Was about 4 foot tall. I think it was a Zenith. It had short wave on it, medium wave, and long wave. And this house had an antenna strung off from one end to the other across the roof. They would listen to the broadcast in Italy over shortwave in Italian during the war, what was going on in his hometowns over there, because he was born in Italy. And then I can remember they'd sit in there in the evenings. Him and Mr. Bursey would listen to the radio in Italian, because they could pick it up from overseas and on the short wave. And then I know he used to sit in his rocking chair and rock. And me as a little kid, being mean, they had a wood stove. I'd get a piece of wood, and whenever he rocked forward, I'd stick it under his rocker in the back, and he'd hit that rocker, and he would come out of that chair because he couldn't rock, and he would come after us. And boy, he always had a fly swatter. He'd just whip us good with the fly swatter and sit back down, twisted his mustache. He had a mustache. He twisted that mustache and sat down and started listening to the radio again. My grandmother, she made spaghetti every day. There's the table, there's a terrazzo table that was handmade. I think Irvin still has it in there, that she made spaghetti on every day. Fresh noodles or fresh pasta, she made it for spaghetti. That's what she cooked. She cooked spaghetti every day. And she made it homemade. I can remember her rolling them out on a rolling pin, rolling that dough up and then slicing it real thin with a knife and cooking it, cooking the noodle to make the spaghetti. She was, I don't recall a whole lot, except I do remember going to the funerals. They, at that time, they kept the bodies in the home. And I remember her body laying, sitting right there.
You were talking earlier about the winery and how y'all helped with the winery. What would the kids do to help? What was the kids' part?
During the winery, whenever my dad, when we was old enough, we would help my dad in the winery. We'd go down and our job, we'd put the seals on the bottles, because Daddy and his sisters and his brother-in-laws would bottle the wine. They'd make the wine, they'd ferment the wine, they'd do the work. But when it come to bottling, us kids always went down there, and we could put the seals on the bottles. They'd put the bottles in the cases, and the seals was a white seal. They would come out of a special solution. You pick it up, you stick it on the bottle, and when it dried, it sealed the bottle. And that's what us kids normally would do down in the winery, or get in the way. Mostly time, and then sometimes we'd get in the way and Daddy'd run us out. Or we'd get up and start playing in the tanks or climbing on top of them, and we'd get in trouble for doing that. But mostly the kids, we just put the seals on the bottles. Maybe with older's biggest one, whenever it was big enough, we would carry the cases out and stack them up so they could be loaded on the truck.
Tell me more about the business, like the label that you had and the work that went into actually making
my dad had, his main label was Liberty Bell. Now, we had a Liberty Bell grape, we had a Liberty Bell apple, then we had a White Diamond label. That was a liqueur. That was a 48 proof liqueur. Then we had a Ruby Red, which was, he called it a natural wine. It didn't have alcohol in it. It was just natural ferment, just whatever the grape fermented out was called a Ruby Red. That was the 4 that I can think of. There was another one called Delaware, which they didn't approve because it was too, at that time, there's a picture of a lady with a bathing suit, and they said that was too outgoing, too sexy and everything for that time back then before the war, that was no. But now then it would be okay. But to make the grapes, they would pick the grapes in the morning in the vineyard. I remember he would have a group, it's called Joe Starr. He was an Indian, and his family lived in Stillwell, Oklahoma. He would call them up, and he would get he would get Joe Starr and all his family, or his tribe. They would camp up here by the vineyards, up on top of the hill up there. They would camp up there. They would pick all of our grapes. They would haul them in. And then he had a hammer mill, at the winery, and the men folks, Daddy and his brother-in-laws and whoever he had working for him, would mash the grapes, put them in the fermentation tank, let them sit there for about 12 to 14 days is about what it took for them to ferment out like he wanted. Then they would drain the alcohol or the grape wine. Then they would take the pummies or the grape, and they would put them through the press and press all the juice out, so you didn't have nothing but just dry hulls. And then they would go dump them out in the field. And then that wine was sitting in it for so long till it got through fermenting. The grape juice did. When it fermented to a certain thing, he would stop the fermentation. And I don't remember what he used to stop the fermentation with. And that's when he would add his alcohol to it. As he used the wine, he would add his alcohol to that natural wine to bring it up to the 19 to 21% or to the 48% liqueur that he wanted to make. The grape cuttings, I remember we had an old bull one time. Of course, them grape hulls and stuff, they were fermented. They had a little kick to them. That's what they made schnappa out of. In the old country, they make schnappa, which is, just a grape jack, in other words. But it was schnappa. But we never did make it. They just threw them away. But the old cows would come up and they'd eat that stuff. I remember they had an old white-faced bull. Can't remember his name. But anyway, he'd come up and he'd eat that grape hulls, eat all that pressings. Pretty soon, they were still working in the winery. They heard him just a-bawling and a-hollering and crazy cane out there. So they run out there, and I remember I was in there helping them. Run out there, and there was that bull trying to walk down that hill down there on all 4 legs, and he was drunk. He was just staggering everything else. They thought, look, that was the funniest thing you ever saw was a drunk cow, a drunk old bull. He eat enough of that stuff made him drunk. That was funny. And that's That's a lot of old memories back there.
What about the customers that would come by and buy your wine? Do you remember? Tell me about that.
Well, we didn't have too many of them that would come by here. He had his wine. My dad had a wine route, but we would sell it here at the house, one bottle at a time or two. I remember we had some folks that would come by, and they lived up in Gentry and stuff. They would come into Tontitown to do shopping or whatever they were doing. They'd come by here and they'd buy a bottle or two of wine, but mostly we sold our wine to, Daddy had his wine route. We sold them to distributors or liquor stores throughout the state of Arkansas. We had, at that time, our distributor here in Fayetteville, I can't think of his name, he had a Budweiser franchise, and he would come out and he would order wine, and he'd pick up truckloads of wine, and he would distribute it to his customers. We sold it, Daddy sold it to the roadside stands that was here in Tontitown. One was my Uncle Woody and Aunt Lena's. They had a little wine station, beer joint there, and he sold it to them. Then he sold it to some of these little stands up and down 71, at the old 71 north of Springdale and south of Springdale. But mostly he had made his route. I went with him one time. We went down to El Dorado, Arkansas. We had a distributor down in El Dorado. We had one in Texarkana that we delivered truckloads of wine to. And we had one in, not Clarksville, it was Conway. We had a small distributor in Conway. And that's how he got rid of his wine, through distributors. He didn't get out and, he just, because you couldn't get out and make every liquor store and what beer joint there was in the state, so you had to have your distributors. Then I remember during the war, my daddy he could buy all the sugar he wanted, even though it was rationed, because he had a government buyer that buying for the government. He sold it half a pint bottles to the government for the pilots, they used it for medicinal purposes, they called it. But this distributor the buyer for the government would come out and buy this half a pints, and he could get all the sugar he wanted to make the wine. And I remember they'd come in boxcars down in Springdale, Arkansas, and we'd go down there in that old 1941, was it 42? 1942 Ford 3/4 ton and a half truck, unload them boxcars and bring that 100-pound sacks of sugar here. This house upstairs was full of sugar. The old shed over there where the Irvin's tore down now, the old garage was full of sugar. He had all kinds of sugar, more sugar than he could ever use, because he had to have the sugar to make the wine to sell to the government. So it was one of them, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours, I guess. And I remember that after the war was over with, we had sugar. The upstairs of this house, I don't know how many 100-pound sacks of sugar there was left over, and he couldn't use it. So he had 7-Up Bottling Company out of Fayetteville, Arkansas, come up here, took all that sugar, made their syrup right out here in front of the winery, and hauled it back to make their 7-Up with. And I remember during the war, everybody in Tontitown had sugar, because if they needed sugar, they know where to go get it.
Tell me about your earliest memories of Tontitown.
My earliest memories of Tontitown, I would believe, well, I remember going to school. My earliest memories, I believe that I can recall back before I went to school, when they had the grape festival at the old schoolhouse, which is no longer there. The first grape festival I remember, I must not have been 3 or 4 years old, maybe 5 at the most. It was right across the street from the church. It was where the Tontitown Mercantile Company used to be. Right there, I don't know what it's called now, but that was the old schoolhouse, the original schoolhouse in Tontitown, wooden built. And I remember that's the grape festival was held there. They had it around that schoolhouse. The old house that they built down, the priest on that was Father Schaefer. I remember that. It was Father Schaefer. But that's the earliest remember. Then I can remember when the war was over with, the day that the World War II. Everybody met down in Tontitown where the stoplight is right now. Back then it was just, it wasn't, I don't even think it was paved road. But where the stoplight, everybody that got there, they started whooping and hollering. The church bell was ringing, and everybody was just having a good time. Back then, when the day that the war was officially over with, I can remember that. I can remember back that they called John Millar, old Mr. Millar. He had a store south of the church on that road down there, about where the park is now, down on the south end of the park. He had a store down there. He used to play the organ for us school kids. He'd play the organ in the church. Back in then, I remember that when the old Perona Milling Company, I remember when that was still going. Right across the street there from where Pam, I believe it's Pam now, across the street there from the old, there was Perona Milling Company there. They used to make flour, chicken feed and everything else. The original post office was on there, was over there. And back in then, and there wasn't a whole lot back then to do, except we'd go down, we'd play bocce at night. I'd go down and watch them play bocce at the luncheonette. Of course, like I said, we had Daddy had the first luncheonette in Tontitown. They had the first bocce court, and we had the ball diamond. And that's where my mom and Dad lived, and that's where, whenever I was born, she walked from there half a mile up to my grandmother's house before I was born. But the olden days, there wasn't much left. I remember the Venetian Inn being built from Uncle Mono, my dad's brother-in-law. He built the Venetian Inn and had cabins around it back in, I don't know when that was built, Lord God, that must have been around 46, 47, somewhere in there. I remember going to school, and Uncle Jake and Aunt Madeline had a cafe there in Tontitown. It's where let me think what store it is now. I don't even remember that station now. It's somewhere up there where the Pinaldo Brothers garage is. It's right along in that area. They had a cafe. We go to school, and that's where we'd go eat for our lunch. Go down there, Uncle Jake and Aunt Madeline's, and eat our lunch down there. Walk back to school. Who was taught by the nuns. I remember the nuns teaching us, they were mean. Some of them were. I remember Sister Bernadine. She was just a little old short one, but she was a good nun. But to us kids, she was mean because they'd made us mind. They wouldn't let us do what we wanted to. They taught us how to be good. But it was nice. I remember the football team. We had a football team in the 6th and 7th and 8th grade there in Tontitown. The Father Stouter was a priest that started, I believe. And Henry Piazza, we called him Bulldozer. He was our fullback. I was the right halfback. Dickie Rosa was the left halfback. Maestri, I can't think of his name. Leslie Maestri was a quarterback. Maxie Taldo, I believe, was a center. And Philip Piazza, and I don't remember who all there was on there. But we had a football team back then that we played 2 or 3 years. And I remember the first year of our football team, we went to Tulsa, Oklahoma, and played some Catholic school over there and beat them. And they were the Tulsa's champion, and we beat them. And they couldn't figure out how us kids could play so hard. I said, Henry Piazza back then, we called him Bulldozer. He was a husky old man. Everybody asked, how did the kids get that big and strong? We always tell them they work on a farm. They work on a farm. They're not city folk. But it was nice. Now then, I wish kids would have what we had back then, because now that they're all computers and they're all iPhones and playing with their thumbs, and they're going to have arthritis when they're my age, and they're not going to be able to move their thumbs because they're out wearing them out right now when they're kids.
Tell me about the baseball games. Who would play and where would they play?
At the baseball games back then, Tontitown called themselves Tontitown Grapers. They were their older folks. I was just young to remember the baseball games then. The first Daddy was one of the coaches. He was the manager, the first one. And they had the baseball diamonds down there on the luncheonette. There was like Bill Fury, which was my godfather. He was a pitcher. Uncle Fred Chola, he was a pitcher. They would play like Westville, Oklahoma. They would play Prairie Grove. They would play Lincoln, the little city towns, all that what they had on Sundays. They had a ball team, and they'd travel all over the country. We'd play Sulphur Springs, just the old get together. And they had a good time back then. They couldn't sell beer on Sunday, but they always had pop. They always had drinks. I know, especially when they was there at the luncheonette, my mama would always open up the stand that was there that she had that was outside the dance hall there, and she would sell a pop out of there because you couldn't open the beer joint up because it was Sunday, it was against the law. But she could sell the pop. And it was just a Sunday get together for everybody to go watch a ball game. From the old folks, they called them the Grapers, Tontitown Grapers. I was too small to play, and then whenever I got out of high school here whenever I got out of grade school here in Tontitown, I went to Subiaco Academy, so I didn't participate in the ball games after that because I went to high school. I went to high school at Subiaco Academy.
You talked earlier about working, helping with the winery. When you were a kid and growing up, what other jobs did you do for money?
When I was a kid growing up, we didn't get paid working in there. What we would do, you worked as a family, but for making money, we'd pick strawberries. I remember picking strawberries for 2 cents a quart. We used to go up here. There was a lady down here, I can't think of the name, down here on Brush Creek. They had a lot of strawberries. We would pick strawberries. And that's how we made our spending money, pick strawberries. Now then, whenever we went to school, of course we didn't work, but this was in the summertime. We'd pick strawberries. And then Daddy, if we worked in the grapes, I usually drove the tractor whenever we was picking grapes because I was too small to do anything else. But I was big enough that I could drive the tractor. And he would give us 50 cents on a weekend. And for that 50 cents, I could hitchhike into Springdale. I could go to the movie. I could buy me a Baby Ruth candy bar and a 7-Up and still have a nickel left. I could go, it cost a quarter for the movie. Baby Ruth candy bar was a nickel. That big pop was a nickel. And I'd go get it's Ellis's Ice Cream Company. Got out of the movie theater, went to Ellis's Ice Cream Company there on Springdale Main Street and get 2 big old dips of ice cream for a nickel, take the rest of the money, come home, hitchhike back home. That's the way we grew up. And everybody, they had different ways, but most of the time they picked strawberries or you picked your grapes, or the kids did.
Where all did you live? Did you live in the same place, or did you live in different places?
I lived in, me and my mom and dad, I was born in, they lived in the luncheonette. They was running the luncheonette whenever I was born. And from there, I lived right down here, which is the house right below this one now. I lived there. Whenever they moved from the luncheonette, they rented it to, I can't remember who leased it, rented it. But they moved there when Uncle Dick left this house. Daddy and Grandpa Mantegani, rather, they bought all this back from Uncle Dick and them, because that used to be Dad's half-brother's house and a canning factory. Then he moved to St. Louis. My Grandpa Mantegani bought that back from him. Mom and Dad lived down there along with me, and that's where my sister, sister was born down there. And then whenever my grandmother and grandfather died, my dad moved up here. Then he rented that out to an El Chola. And they had 3 little chicken houses down there. They raised, I think the maximum of 3 was 700 chickens or something like that. Compared to now, it's nothing. But then I was raised right here in this house right here. Irvin was born. Let's see. Barbara was born down there. Zeta was born here. Julia Ray was born here, and Irvin was born in Springdale Hospital.
Tell me about, you mentioned some of them already, but tell me some more of the people that you remember that were your classmates and friends when you went to school.
The classmates and friends when I went to school, well, I remember there was 9 boys and 3 girls in our class. I went from 1st grade all the way to the 8th grade. And then I think we picked up the 4th one. The girls were, let me think if I can remember, there was Bernice Artemani, Ellen Barucki, and Lewana Barriola. They were the 3 girls. And us boys, majority of it was all cousins. So there was myself, Leedy, which is Gasparado, Philip Piazza, Dickie Rosal, Henry Piazza, Tomello, Charles Tomello. Lord, let me think of how many more there was. I can't remember all of them. There was 9 of them. That's 6. That's pretty good. Who's the 3 I'm missing? I don't remember. But there was 3 of them. There was 9 of us.
What about the teachers that you remember?
The teachers were, the teachers that we had were all nuns. I remember Sister Bernadine, Sister Quintella, Sister Georgia, Georgine, Sister Winterford. And I'll tell you what, they were good nuns, they were smart, but boy, they were strict. You didn't get by with nothing. And you got caught, like, I remember we used to try to all pull our stunts on them, as kids always did, try to chew gum. If you get caught chewing gum in school, they put you in a corner, made you stand on your tiptoes, stuck that gum up on the wall, put it a little bit higher than your nose, and made you stick your nose in it, and you didn't dare not to get off of them tiptoes. If your nose come out of that gum, you got your fingers whipped. And the way they would whip your fingers, they'd get your hands like that. She'd get a ruler, and she'd just start tapping it, not hard. After about 10 minutes, it started hurting. I mean, it hurt. You couldn't wait till she quit. And they didn't have to, if you don't think it hurt, just try it. Just hold your hand and somebody and just start tapping the tip of them fingers. After a while, it begins to tell on you. You didn't want to chew gum no more. And I remember we used to have inkwells in the old desk. We had 2 desks, side by side, 2 people to a desk. We had inkwells. If you remember the old, I don't know about it, you had ink in there. The nuns, at that time, they wore their habit with the big white, their habit that they had, it was white, whatever they call it back then, in their head cars back, the way the nuns dressed back then. We used to get us a spitball, dip it in there and get us a straw. Catch them when they wasn't looking, the minute they turn around, shoot that spitball at them and hit that with that old ink. That's how mean some of us was. You talk about getting busted. That's when they took you back there, and they used their, they always carried a strap. I don't know what they called it, but they had like a belt hanging down their side as part of their uniform back then. She'd take that off, and you'd get 3 lickings, 3 raps with that. Boy, now that hurt. You didn't do that but one time. But that was the old school days, back in the old schoolhouse we had radiators to heat it with. In the wintertime, them things would get cold. It'd get cold in there because they get full of water. They just bang and knock and bang. You'd have to drain the water, go down and light the furnace again, the boiler to get the steam coming back up. But it was kids nowadays, they don't know what it's like to have to, just do with what you can do with. They got it too easy.
Did you go to the church there? If so, tell me about it.
Whenever I growed up in Tontitown, we all went to the church there in Tontitown. We was all raised Catholics, and we was real religious back then. A lot more than now. You didn't miss church on Sundays. All school kids, we sat right up in front, and the nuns sat behind us. And you better behaved in church. You better paid attention. You better not talk. You better not play around. You better watch, because if you didn't, you got in trouble, because they was watching you. Them nuns were. They would come up and they'd flip you behind the ear, make you pay attention. And back then, the religion was different than it is now. You was more focused, I should say, on your religion than they are now. Now that they go in, they talk, they visit more than anything else. But it's just the way you was brought up, just the difference in the times. Back then, it was a church law that you had to fast on Friday. You couldn't eat meat on Friday. Now then you can have the biggest steak there is because times is changing. They all, and it's just, everything's different now. It's not like it was in the olden days. It's changed for the worse. Because as far as I'm concerned, everything is too uppy.
When you were a kid, growing up in Tontitown, what would you and your friends do for fun?
When I was growing up in Tontitown, me and my friends, well, us boys, we would have parties. We'd go on hay rides. We'd get up here and get. Uncle Joe lived down here. My dad's half brother lived down here in the old house whenever we moved up here, and because he bought that place, Daddy sold him that place, and he had an old hay wagon. We'd come up here and fill it full of hay. We'd hook up the tractor. Daddy had a tractor. Uncle Joe had a tractor. We'd hook up Daddy's tractor. We'd drive on a hay ride. We'd go down to Brush Creek. We'd go all around the dirt road. We'd circle plumb around down there by Brush Creek, I forget all how we went, but we went way off down by campground to come around on a hay ride. We'd have hay ride. We would have parties at different people's houses. Sometimes us kids back then, we would, now then come to think of it, we would say we was crazy, but sometimes us guys would get together, 4, 5, 6 of us, and we'd have a BB gun fight. Get out here in the field with high grass and shoot at each other with BB guns. And when you just come to think of it now, I think, man, we're crazy. You do that now, we could have put an eye out or something, but we didn't think nothing of it. That was just fun. We would doing that. We'd we would have races we get the old oil cans. Back then, oil cans was metal cans. We get them old shoes that we'd have. We step on them oil cans and make shoes out and walk on them, and we'd have races so you could run the fastest or the furthest with that before one of them fell off. Or we'd make us we have a stick, we make a little nail some 2 pieces of wood on the side of it, and we get a wagon wheel and roll it down the road so you could roll one the furthest or the fastest. We'd have like that, and we would have on Easter, we'd have Easter egg hunts, but we'd have an Easter egg roll. You get your eggs, special eggs, see you could roll it the furthest down a board that was set up. This stuff like that, we'd play hopscotch a lot of times. They'd go down and play hopscotch at school, which a lot of people don't know what that is now. But we done just entertainment like that. We'd think up of stuff. We'd go up and climb, we go up in the timber, spend all day in the timber, swinging on grapevines and stuff up through there, and just whatever we could think of to entertain ourselves. We made our own entertainment, more or less.
What did your parents and their friends do for fun?
My parents, for fun, really, they raised a family. They worked daylight till dark. I remember, we never went to a movie with Mom and Dad. They'd work mostly, that's it. They would have, once in a while, I don't remember any, because I was too young, but Mom and Daddy, they used to have dances right out here on this porch. They would have a dance out here on weekends. Oh, and that's right, they used to go to dances down in the school basement. I remember now that they had a dance down there once or twice a month, and all the town folks would get down there and have a dance down in the basement of the back then it was a school. Now then it's not used, and it's still there, but it's that building down there. But they would have dances in that basement, and us young kids would go down there, but our parents would get out there and go to the dances. And I guess whenever they were younger, because I was born, but down at the luncheonette there was a dance hall, so I'd assumed that they'd done a lot of dancing back then.
You talked earlier about going to the Grape Festival. What else can you remember about the Grape Festival? What was it like, and what did you do when you went?
Whenever back then, it's grown so big now. Back then, it wasn't as big as it was. I remember the first one I can remember. I remember they had a few stands. They had the bottle that you set up, you throw balls that knocked down, but they had 2 or 3 of them where they had a man sticking his head through a tarp, and you'd pay, I think it was a nickel or a dime for an egg, and you throw that egg at him, try to hit him in the face, bust that egg on him. And that games like that, and just a lot of food though. Mostly it was a lot of eating. They had, instead of the spaghetti supper like they do now, they had their stands set up, and they'd have different families would have different things out there that they would donate to the church, because it was all a church function. They would donate and have a big festival, because it started out as a Thanksgiving for having a good grape harvest. Because back in the olden days, I never did remember the grape festival was always the last week or last 2 weeks of August. It always was 19th, 20th, and 21st, or 21st, 22nd, and 23rd, because they didn't have to worry about the school dictating when it did. And they always had grapes, and it started out as a get together to celebrate the grape harvest. That's what it originally was. But now then it's all commercialized. It's grown out of proportion, and all the memories is gone.
What other local traditions or events do you remember besides the Grape Festival and the dances and stuff?
I don't remember a whole lot of events that happened. The Grape Festival was the main one. Then the baseball games on Sundays. That's about it for a little old country town like Tontitown was. I mean, everybody worked. They had, I remember my daddy was telling me that they used to get the houses tore down now, and there was one that's built with bricks just like this, and it was down here. Let me think of the old Penzel's house down here. They used to take all their milk, and they would take it down there and they'd weigh it. All the people around here, they'd make cheese. And you'd get your cheese from there. They'd make their cheese, and according to the weight of milk you brought in is how much cheese you got. There was the center part down there. The building is gone now. But I remember Daddy telling us that they used to make the cheese. But then that kind of disappeared, and then I remember Daddy then started making cheese right here at the house. Put it right in the kitchen, just make his cheese, and set it down in the basement down there where the old winery used to be. have it stored in there for make big old cheese.
Other stories can you think of? Maybe the things I didn't ask about.
Old stories. Well, I don't know about the stories.
Or memories, maybe. Better word.
Well, the I remember the fire that burnt the old building company down. That out across the street from where that mercantile is now. I remember when that fire was there. It started in the feed mill, back in the feed mill back there. Uncle George and Aunt Alma had a cafe there in the front. They had a cafe. The feed mill was in the back, and it caught a fire, and that was a big thing then. But it burnt that whole feed mill down because they didn't have no fire trucks. They didn't have no fire department. They come out of Springdale to fight it. I remember that. I remember Claude and Emma Mersani's had a little mercantile company just right there by the Penalty Brothers garage. That was only 2 stores in town. That one and the Artemani store there, where the old mercantile is now. The Venetian Inn, that was Uncle Mono built that. I remember that used to be a vineyards back in there. That was all vineyards back in that area, where the Venetian Inn is. And that back then, though, they sold the Welch grape juice, which is in Springdale then. They bought a lot of grapes. And what they couldn't sell their Welch, then they sold their daddy bought a lot of them to make wine because he couldn't raise them all. Because he bought a lot of grapes from people around here.
Let's talk about the blocks that were made locally and used to build a lot of the buildings. Who made them and how were they built?
The blocks, the rock blocks, or the cement blocks that the old church was built out of, and it was tore down. But the schoolhouse, the old schoolhouse, the blocks that is built out of, the blocks that this house is built out of, was made by my grandfather. And a couple of houses around here, the old Mersani house is still alive, still up. It's run down right over here, right down Mantegani Road here. It was built, but my grandfather made all those blocks. He had a machine, and he was a stonemason. That's what he done. He built, before he come over here, he was an architect and a builder of some of the good, big cathedrals in Italy. But he come over here and he had that machine that made these blocks. And he would hire people. Made these blocks to build these houses with that they had, like this house is built out of and some others around here. And then whenever he died, Dad sold that machine. It was to be stored. It was stored under the old porch out here. It and all the trays that the blocks dried out on. He sold it to someone in Siloam Springs, and they built buildings up there out of the same mold as these, up where the old Spot Theater used to be. There in Siloam Springs. And that was talking about the Spot Theaters. I remember the Spot Theaters. That's where the first Catholic Mass was ever said in Siloam Springs, Arkansas. It was in the Spot Theater. Father Schaefer started that, said the first Mass there. Dickie Rosel and myself was the first altar boys to serve Mass in Siloam Springs, Arkansas.
What do you remember about the growth and the change of the town over the years? It's gone from being small to really a lot bigger. What do you remember about that?
Well, the town, I remembered the town being a little small when I was growing up, but like I said, I left. I went to the service, and whenever I left, it wasn't much bigger. Well, it had started to grow, but still had the Venetian Inn then. They still had the luncheonette. We had Jack's Liquor Store then. We had the Tontitown Mercantile, Penalty Brothers Garage, and Claude and Emma's. And there's another little cafe down there. I can't think of that. That's about what there was there, and Woody and Lena's beer joint right there. That was about it. I went to the service. I come back, and then I worked here at Standard Register for 7 years. Then I moved to Oklahoma, and that's when the town really started growing. After about, I left here in 1963 and moved to Oklahoma. Well, I went to California first. I worked out there for 7 years because I was a printer back then. And I worked out there 7 years, and I come back and had a job there in Oklahoma. And that's where I've been ever since 1970. But the town is just, since then, since about 65, I'd say since, yeah, around 65, 68, somewhere along in there, it's just exploded. And now then, it don't even look like Tontitown.
If someone that you didn't know who had never been to Tontitown asked you, tell me about your hometown of Tontitown, what is it like? What would you tell them?
Someone asked me about my hometown of Tontitown, I would tell them, back then, it was one of the best places there was to live. Right now, it's one of the best places there is to eat. There's 2 places to eat in Tontitown. Right now, there used to be 3 good ones. Mary Mastery's, which she used to have her house was down by the graveyard whenever I was growing up. That's where she had served her dinners down there. But then she moved out on 412 and 112, and she was the Mary Mastery's for a long time. And it's finally gone. But there was Mary Mastery's, the Venetian Inn, and now Mama Z's. And right now, Venetian Inn and Mama Z's is about the 2 best places you can eat. I don't know, there's probably other cafes around, but you can't beat them 2.
If someone asked you to complete this sentence, what would you say? My favorite thing about Tontitown is...
If someone asked me to tell them about my favorite thing about Tontitown, I would say that it was my roots, and it was a good town to grow up in. You learned, you respected your parents. They taught you in school to respect your parents, to obey your parents, and to work hard and treat people right.
If somebody asked you, they said, well, I know your family lived in Tontitown, and some of them still do. Why Tontitown? What would you tell them to that? Why Tontitown?
If someone asked me why Tontitown, I would probably tell them, well, it's the heritage. The original Tontitown settlers come from Italy, moved to Sunnyside, Arkansas. If people knows the history of Tontitown, they were malaria, I believe, is what wiped most of them out, and what few families moved up here. They settled it. They worked hard. They survived, and they made a good little place to live for people to raise their families. And Tontitown is a quiet town. It don't have all the. I live in a big town. I live in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma, and to me there's too much crime. There's too much lawlessness. Tontitown is not that way. Tontitown, I don't think there's ever been a robbery here. I don't think there's ever been a murder here. All these other towns around, they're all lawlessness. And Tontitown, to me, it'd be a place to raise a family, because it's more open, it's more country. It's down to earth. It's not all fast life, as you should say, in the city or anything. It's just kind of relaxing little town to be in.
We were talking earlier about stuff you would do for fun. What were some of maybe the mischievous things you would do for fun?
Well, some of the mischievous things us kids would do for fun, especially on Halloween. Everybody had an outhouse, because back then they didn't have indoor plumbing. We would go around and we'd see how many outhouses we could push over. We would go out, or we'd haul them up, we'd pick them up, and if we didn't push them over, we'd load them on a truck and carry them and put them up, stand them up there in Rich already reminded you store right there in Tontitown where the mercantile is now. We would put 2 or 3 of them up there. Sometimes we would even be brave enough, we'd put one, we'd haul it to Springdale, stick it in a boxcar, close the door on an empty boxcar. And I remember doing that. Then I remember one time, there was the Frankels up there buying cheese. They had built them a brand new one on the side of the barn. And we was waiting for them. And we said, we're going to get that one for sure. So that night, we waited till about 10, 11, 12 o'clock. It was a good one. There's a bunch of us kids. There was a truckload of us. We snuck up through his vineyard, got up to his outhouse. And what we was going to do, we knew that he was up there watching. We could see the light on in the house. So we all said, well, what we're going to do, we're just going to count 1, 2, 3. We're going to run, just push it over. So we said, okay. So we all got that, and we went 1, 2, 3, and we started running. Everybody going to run and hit that outhouse in the front and push it over backwards. Well, we hadn't noticed. But what he had done, smart is, he'd moved that outhouse back over the holes. When we run, instead of getting to the outhouse, we fell in the hole where all the crap was. And to top it all off, he was up in the barn loft. We didn't know it. He opened that barn loft door where the cows were hay, and then he had a bucket of liquefied cow manure, and he threw it all over us kids. That was the last time we ever went and dumped his house over. That was Halloween. I remember another time. We was over to High Chola. We was going to dump his outhouse over. We went over there and we come through the timber. We pushed it on the back and we pushed it over on the front. It fell over and we started hollering. We heard somebody in there hollering. High was in there in the outhouse, using the outhouse, but we pushed it over. He was in there. We didn't stop to let him out either. We took off. But that was some of the mischievous stuff we used to do.
Anything else you can think of?
I remember one time on Halloween, it was it was the old house over here, Mersani's old house. And Enel Mersani, his daughter was at Edna Lou. And she'd made some of us mad over something, I don't remember. So on Halloween, we decided we're going to get even with her. So I forget how many of us, there's 6 or 8 of us, we got a tow sack. The old potato sack, we call them tow sack. We filled it full of cow manure and sprinkled gasoline stuff on it. Put it up there, set it on the door, in front of the door, lit it afire. Started hollering, fire, fire, and they took off running. They all come running out of the house and seen that sack of fire, started stomping it off. With all that manure and stuff in there. Just ornery stuff like that. That was, and we used to do some stuff. You know, it was fun. It was clean fun. It didn't hurt nobody. I remember my uncle Uncle Jake Gerald. He had bought an old Henry J. If I remember, if you all know what a Henry J is or not, it's a little old car that Ford made. They only made it 1 year or 2 years. It was just a small car. And he had it parked over here on the road by where Cecil lives. Up in his house, that's where he lived. On Halloween, we come up there. There was six or 7 of us, or maybe 8. We were real quiet. We picked that Henry J up and set it on his porch. It was a small car, and we picked it up and set it on his porch, and he like to never got it out of there. And another time, I remember Johnny Pellin. He was another one in our school class. That's another one I couldn't forgot. He had a donkey. One time, Halloween, we took the donkey. The schoolhouse had a bell tower in it. Went upstairs to the bell tower. We took Johnny Pellin. We took that donkey, jiggled the back door open to the schoolhouse, went upstairs. The donkey led us right up them stairs, went up in the bell tower, and put him in the bell tower. And left him set up there. They like to never got that donkey down because he wouldn't go down the stairs, but he'd go up. And he was in the schoolhouse. That's mischievous. I can't remember. I think the old folk, the men folk, finally had to tie him up and winch him off that bell tower. I can't remember. We wasn't around. We didn't stick around to know how they got him out the next day.